The air was thick with dust and silence, until a tiny voice shattered it. "Please, somebody help! They're hurting my mom!" cried a little black girl, her small hands trembling as she ran down the dirt road. People turned away, pretending not to hear. But one man didn't. A massive figure, the giant farmer everyone in town feared, slowly stood up from his tractor, his shadow stretching across the field. He'd seen many injustices in his life, but nothing like this. As the little girl stumbled toward him, tears streaking her dusty cheeks, he clenched his fists and whispered, "Not today." Because sometimes it takes a giant heart to protect the smallest soul. Subscribe now for more powerful stories that touch your heart. The sun burned hot over the small rural town of Brooksville, a place where whispers traveled faster than the wind, and where poverty and pride often walked hand in hand. In this quiet community, everyone knew who belonged and who didn't. On the outskirts stood Henry Walker, a man known as the Giant, farmer, standing 6'7", with hands like shovels and a face hardened by years of labor. Henry rarely spoke, but when he did, people listened. He lived alone on his farm, tending acres of corn and caring for his old horse, Daisy. Folks said he was mean, unfeeling, but that was only because no one had ever seen the gentleness behind those calloused hands. That same afternoon, Henry was fixing his fence when he heard something, a sound so faint it almost disappeared in the wind. "Help, please! Someone help my mom!" He looked up. Down the dirt road, a small girl, no older than 7, was running barefoot, her torn yellow dress fluttering like a cry for mercy. Her skin was covered in dust, her tiny legs shaking. Henry dropped his tools. "What's wrong, child?" he asked, his deep voice trembling slightly. They beat my mom," she gasped between sobs. "She's hurt. They said we don't belong here." Henry's chest tightened. He had seen injustice before, seen people judged for the color of their skin, seen kindness mocked by cruelty. But this was different. The desperation in that little girl's eyes pierced something deep inside him. Without a second thought, he lifted her into his arms and said, "Show me where." Because in that moment, the silent giant decided he would not let evil win again. Henry sprinted down the dirt road with the little girl clinging to his shoulder, her sobs muffled against his shirt. The late afternoon sun painted the fields gold, but there was nothing warm about what waited ahead. The girl, still trembling, pointed toward a rundown shack hidden behind the trees. "There," she whispered. "That's where they hurt her." Henry's heart pounded. As they neared, he could see the broken windows, the kicked-in door, and the faint sound of a woman crying inside. He carefully set the girl down and told her to stay behind him. Pushing open the splintered door, he froze. On the floor lay a woman, blood on her forehead, one arm limp beside her face bruised and swollen. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked like dry wood. "Please, don't hurt my baby." Henry's throat tightened. "You're safe now," he said softly. He knelt beside her, checking her pulse. It was weak, but she was alive. Just then, footsteps crunched outside. Henry turned sharply as 3 men appeared. Rough, mean-looking, and clearly not expecting to see a man his size in the doorway. "Well, well," one of them sneered. "Looks like the farmer decided to play hero." Henry's jaw clenched. "What did you do to this woman?" The man spat on the ground. "Told her to leave our town. We don't need her kind around here." The little girl whimpered behind Henry's leg. "You monsters!" she cried. Henry stepped forward. "You're going to walk away right now," he growled. But the men only laughed. The tallest one, wearing a torn denim jacket, picked up a crowbar. "Or what? You think you can stop us, old man?" Henry didn't answer. He didn't need to. With one swing, he knocked the crowbar from the man's hands, the metal clattering against the floor. The room went silent. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. "Leave," Henry said again, his voice low, dangerous. "Before I make you." The men exchanged glances, and for the first time, their arrogance faltered. They backed off slowly, muttering curses as they disappeared into the trees. Henry turned back to the woman. "Can you hear me? Stay awake." He gently lifted her onto his arms and carried her outside into the light. The little girl followed closely, wiping tears from her cheeks. "Is she gonna die?" Henry looked at the bruised woman in his arms. "Not if I can help it." He took her to his farmhouse, laid her on the couch, and fetched clean cloths and water. For hours he cleaned her wounds, gave her sips of water, and tried to comfort the child, whose name he learned was Sarah. "Sarah," he said quietly, "what's your mom's name?" "Lydia," the girl whispered. "She didn't do anything wrong. She just came here to work." Henry nodded grimly. "She doesn't have to explain herself to anyone." Word spread fast in Brooksville. By sunset, half the town knew that the giant farmer had taken in a beating. Black woman and her child. Some called him a fool. Others warned him to stay out of their business. But Henry didn't care. For the first time in years, he felt like he was doing something that truly mattered. That night, as thunder rumbled across the hills, Henry sat beside Lydia, watching her chest rise and fall. He looked over at little Sarah, fast asleep, her tiny hand holding her mother's. He whispered to himself, "No one's hurting them again, not while I'm breathing." But outside, hidden beyond the fence, the same three men stood under the shadows of the trees, their faces hard, their voices cold. "You think that giant can protect them forever?" one hissed. The leader smirked. "Tomorrow we'll finish what we started." The wind howled through the fields, and somewhere deep inside Henry's farmhouse, a storm far greater than thunder was about to rise. The next morning, the storm clouds still hung low over Brooksville. The air was thick, heavy, like the world itself was holding its breath. Henry stood on his porch, a mug of black coffee in his hand, eyes fixed on the horizon. He hadn't slept all night. Inside, Lydia rested on the couch, still weak but alive. Sarah sat beside her, drawing pictures with an old pencil Henry had found in the barn. He had promised himself one thing. No one would ever hurt them again. But deep down, Henry knew it wasn't over. As the sun began to rise, a truck engine rumbled in the distance. He recognized the sound instantly. The same three men from yesterday were coming back. And this time, they weren't coming to talk. Henry set his mug down slowly and grabbed the shotgun hanging by the door. His heart was calm, but his hands were steady. Too steady. He'd been through storms before. This one he intended to end. The truck screeched to a stop at the gate. The leader, the tall man in the denim jacket, jumped out with a smirk. Two others followed, carrying chains and bats. "Morning, farmer," the man yelled. "We told you to stay out of it." But you didn't listen. Henry stepped off the porch, his boots sinking slightly into the wet soil. "You should have stayed gone," he said quietly. The men laughed. "You think you can scare us with that toy?" One taunted, pointing at Henry's shotgun. Henry's eyes narrowed. "No," he said. "But I can stop you." Before they could reply, thunder cracked overhead, a sound so loud it shook the air. The wind whipped through the fields, scattering dust and dead leaves. The leader took a step forward. "Move aside, old man. That woman and her brat don't belong here." Henry's voice was calm, but it carried a weight that silenced even the storm. "They belong wherever their hearts lead them. You're the ones who don't belong." And then, chaos erupted. The first man lunged, swinging a chain. Henry sidestepped, grabbed his wrist, and twisted. The sound of bone snapping cut through the wind. The man screamed and fell. The second came from behind, but Henry turned fast, ramming his shoulder into the attacker's chest, knocking him flat into the mud. The leader pulled a pistol from his jacket. But before he could aim, Henry's shotgun boomed. The blast tore through the ground near his feet, sending dirt and rocks flying. The man stumbled back, his face pale. You wouldn't." Henry took a step closer, the shotgun now inches from his trembling hands. "Try me." Inside the house, Sarah screamed. Lydia, weak but awake, forced herself to sit up. Through the window, she saw Henry standing in the rain. Tall, silent, unyielding, like a mountain protecting its valley. "Henry," she cried. "Don't." But it was too late. The men turned to flee, scrambling back toward their truck. One of them shouted, "This isn't over, farmer." Henry didn't follow. He simply watched them go, rain soaking his shirt, his face cold and unreadable. When they were gone, He lowered the gun and stood there for a long moment, breathing hard. Then he turned back toward the farmhouse. Lydia was standing at the door now, holding onto the frame for balance. Her eyes were wide, part fear, part awe. "You shouldn't have risked your life for us," she whispered. Henry met her gaze. "You don't have to thank me. Nobody deserves what they did to you. Not here, not anywhere." Tears welled in her eyes. "But why? Why would you care?" Henry looked down at Sarah, who ran and hugged her mother tightly. He smiled faintly. "Because once, someone saved me too, when I didn't think I deserved it." The wind softened. The first rays of morning light broke through the clouds, falling across their faces. For the first time, Lydia smiled, a real, fragile smile. But far away, in the shadow of the woods, the three men watched from their truck, eyes full of hate and humiliation. The leader clenched his jaw. "We'll come back for him," he hissed. For all of them. Yet what none of them knew, what they couldn't possibly understand, was that the giant farmer wasn't just one man anymore. He had become a shield, and the next time darkness came to Brooksville, it would find a wall of light waiting for it. The storm had ended, but the fight for justice had only just begun. The storm passed. The sky cleared slowly, like a curtain being drawn back after a long, dark play. The soft gold of morning spilled across the soaked fields of Brooksville, lighting up the small farmhouse that had become a symbol of something far greater than anyone realized. Inside, the air was calm. Lydia sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. The bruises on her face had begun to fade, but the pain in her eyes still lingered, not from fear anymore, but from disbelief. Henry sat across from her, quiet as always, his rough hands folded over the table. Sarah played on the floor nearby, humming softly to herself, her tiny voice filling the silence that had once been filled with sobs. It had been 3 days since the attack. The sheriff had come and gone, taking statements, shaking Henry's hand, and saying, "You did right, old man." But Henry didn't feel like a hero. He wasn't one for glory. He just did what needed to be done. Now the town was buzzing. Word had spread quickly. The giant farmer who stood up to the bullies. The man who saved a beaten woman and her child. For the first time, people who had turned away now came knocking on Henry's door, offering food, clothes, and money for Lydia and Sarah. But Henry didn't let them see it as charity. He made it clear, this ain't pity, it's decency. We take care of our own. Lydia tried to understand it. Why this man, who owed her nothing, would risk his life to protect her and her daughter. She had met many people who looked away, who judged her skin before her soul. But Henry, he saw something else, something she thought the world had forgotten. Humanity. That afternoon, she stepped out into the field where Henry was mending a broken fence. She hesitated for a moment, then said softly, "You changed everything for me. For Sarah. I don't know how to thank you." Henry didn't look up. "Don't thank me. Just live." Lydia frowned slightly. "Live?" He nodded, tightening the wire. "Yeah, that's the best way to thank anyone who ever helped you. Live. Be free. And never let fear decide who you are." Tears welled in her eyes again. "You sound like you've been through this before." Henry stopped working and looked at her. Really looked. "A long time ago, someone took me in when I had nothing. Gave me food, a roof. Taught me that the color of your hands don't matter. Only what they do. I guess I'm just passing that lesson on." There was silence for a long moment, broken only by the sound of wind brushing through the wheat. In the weeks that followed, Lydia and Sarah stayed with Henry. The farm came alive again. Laughter in the fields, music from the old radio, the smell of fresh bread from the kitchen. The house that had once echoed with loneliness now felt like home. And something even greater began to happen. The people of Brooksville changed. They started standing up when they saw wrong. They stopped whispering when they saw color. The story of the giant, farmer, and the little black girl spread beyond the town, first to nearby farms, then to cities miles away. Newspapers called Henry the guardian of Brooksville. But to Lydia and Sarah, he was simply Henry, the man who cared when nobody else did. One evening, months later, Sarah came running to him with a drawing. A giant man holding the hands of a small girl and her mother under a golden sky. At the bottom, in shaky letters, she'd written, "The day we met our angel." Henry smiled, his rough hands trembling slightly as he took the drawing. For the first time in years, his eyes filled with tears. That night, as the sun set over the golden fields, Henry stood on his porch watching the horizon. He wasn't thinking about the past anymore. He was thinking about tomorrow. A tomorrow where kindness was stronger than hate, where one act of courage could heal wounds deeper than skin. Because sometimes heroes don't wear capes or uniforms. Sometimes they wear muddy boots and carry hearts big enough to change the world.